Unicorns and glitter and taxidermy critters are just some of the things they like. They also enjoy 80s hair bands, Grizzly Adams and John Goodman, so if you think that's weird then you can take a hike. But the things they enjoy the most are making art and cracking jokes, so without further ado, here are your hosts. You've got your two artsy gals, Here are your two artsy gals.
Hey everybody, this is Katie, and there is no Sharon today. As I told you last week, Sharon's taking a break for a couple of weeks so she can get all moved into her farm and move all of her little birds and kids and what have you, because she's going crazy. So it's just me, but it's not just me, because as promised, I'm going to be interviewing my friend Bob about internet copyright issues, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his new website and the registry on there and what it does for us as artists and how it keeps us safe on the interwebs. So this is my friend Bob Nicholson, and you should know he's super awesome. And he's one of about 10 of my favorite people on the planet. So, hi, Bob.
Hi, Katie. Thank you.
I don't know. I guess, should we start with questions off the top, Bob? Or do you want to talk about your site first? Or how do you want to do it?
Why don't I talk about the site first, and then we'll do questions.
Let's do that, because I'm pretty freaking excited about this. So I'm just going to give it to you. You tell me what it is and what it does.
Very good. So I have a fairly new website called Safeguardcom. And the purpose of this website is twofold. The first purpose is to provide a lot of information about copyright. We have a lot of information that's already on the website, and there's a page where you can ask questions, and if you ask a question, I'll try to come back with an answer. So it's targeted kind of at artists, but also to general audience, anyone that might have an interest in copyright issues. The second part of the website is a registry. So you can register your website, and then you get a little link, some code that you can put on your website that puts a copyright notice on your website. People can click that notice and get some boilerplate text that describes how copyright law works and how your content is protected. And the intent of this is really for you as a website owner to just let people know that you understand your rights under copyright law and you take them seriously and you intend to protect them. And that might deter some people from copying your work. So both the information on the website and the registry are intended just to help people to understand and defend their rights under copyright law.
That's awesome. I actually, as soon as I think when you sent me the message that you were running it out in beta, I registered all of my blogs on there.
Oh, very good. I'm happy to hear that.
So I'm pretty excited about it because I haven't personally had a lot of issue with people using my content because honestly, I'm not a real prolific artist and I don't do a lot to promote myself. So I'm not as well known, but I do have friends, including your wife, who have had issues with stuff like that. And I think it's really, I think that a lot of people just don't understand that they can't use shit on the internet.
Yeah, that's certainly true. It's a very common misconception that if it's on the internet, it's free to use.
So, yeah, well, let's get into some questions and then we'll kind of keep looping back into your website and kind of how it might pertain to each of these situations, just so people kind of understand that. But since we're kind of on the topic, one of my listeners, Kathy Bates, wanted to know if it was illegal to use pictures she downloaded from the internet to make things if she's not using them for profit.
That's a good question. I think it's a good idea to start with basically what is copyright. Copyright is a body of law that's intended to encourage people to create creative works by giving them exclusive ownership of the work that they create. And what that means is that when you create something, you as the artist or the author own all of the rights. and no one else is allowed to copy your work. You own it. They cannot make copies without your permission. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There's a whole body of law called fair use that describes specific exceptions. For example, if I'm writing a review of a film, I'm allowed to include some excerpts from that film for purposes of review and commentary.
Ah, good to know.
So there are some exceptions, but the general rule is that you can't copy someone else's work. And it doesn't matter, to answer the original question, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it for profit or not. If you are making a copy, you are violating the author's or the artist's copyrights.
Now, I want to kind of get into, there is a misnomer attached to this, I think, where a lot of people feel that if they change it by a certain percentage or if they're making changes to it, then it becomes their own. Is that true?
No, it isn't true. There is no bright line. There's no magic number that says if you change it by 30%, it's okay. In general, if you are copying something, you're violating the author's copyright. There is a point where the copy is so transformative that it is no longer even recognizable as a copy. But there's no way you can define that point. You can't say 30% or 90% or 5%. And there's actually some words in a Supreme Court decision that says, at some point. They use those words. They don't define the point. They just say they recognize the fact that sometimes you can transform something to an extent that it is no longer a copy. The way the courts usually address this is with the reasonable person test. If a reasonable person would look at the original work and look at your work and say, yes, you copied, then you're violating the copyright. If a reasonable person would look at your work and the original work and say, no, I don't see a copy here, then you're not violating the copyright. It's a gray area of the law, and it's one that, personally, I like to avoid. I just don't copy at all. But there's certainly no magic number that you can say is a safe amount of change.
So how does that fall into, we had another question based on collage work and people cutting pictures out of magazines or cutting up labels to stuff and using it in their collage that they're selling for profit.
Yeah, that's an area where there's a lot of discussion about this. In fact, there are some entire blogs that people can search the web and find, copyright law for collage artists. In general, if you are cutting something out of a magazine, you have purchased it, the copyright owner has gotten their part of that purchase, and you cut something out of a magazine and you paste it into your collage and you've produced a new original. Well, that's okay because you haven't made a copy. You just cut up the copy that you had purchased.
Okay.
But as soon as you take that collage and you start making reproductions of it, I'm going to make 100 prints and sell the prints. Now I'm making copies. My copies include copies of the original artist's work, and now I'm violating their copyright.
So that's really, I know a lot of artists who actually do prints of their collage work and sell them. So technically speaking, they're infringing upon the original copyright.
Yes. Now, I will mention that exception that we just talked about, the degree to which it is transformative. If I include a tiny, tiny piece of someone's work into a large work of my own, and it is so transformative that the original work is no longer even recognizable within my collage, then that's probably okay. But again, it's a gray area. If someone could look at my collage and clearly see an identifiable component from someone else's original artwork, I could well be held liable for violating their copyright. So it's an area where there isn't a bright line, and I think that probably a great deal of collage work is violating someone's copyright.
So just to get this straight, when you're posting something like on your Facebook art page, you're publishing that work. Is that a correct assumption, legally speaking?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Public display would be considered publishing.
Okay, so that's also a line where people had some question. But when you're posting things to, like when I post things to my Katie Cahill art page, I'm publishing images of my artwork. So if I publish a collage that has an image, I am publishing somebody else's work.
That's right.
So that's a line where I kind of think it's important for, especially because a lot of my listeners, I think, are not artists that publish their work or sell their work. I think the majority of them are people who are either hobbyists or just starting out and are not really aware of the copyright law. And I think the copyright law is something that a lot of people are not aware of.
Yeah, I agree. That's certainly true. That people just don't understand, or they have misconceptions about it because there are so many myths about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but we've already mentioned that if I only use a certain percentage, it's okay, or if it's not for profit, it's okay. And those are myths. In general, those things are not true. The most basic rule is you can't copy someone else's work without their permission.
And this goes on to, because I had a couple people that asked questions about using original music in the background of their YouTube videos, because some people I know do tutorial videos and they want to have music going on in the background, but music falls under the same copyright laws as artwork. So you can't just use someone's music, can you?
No, same copyright law protects music. Now, for someone who wants to have some music in the background on a YouTube video, for example, everybody knows that there are sites where you can go and buy like stock photos and things. Mm-hmm. And you're allowed to use the things you buy because you're paying for them, and the original artist is getting a little piece of what you pay. There are also places where you can get music clips, and you license them, you pay a small fee to use them, and you can incorporate those in your video because you've essentially compensated the artist that created that music. But in general, you can't just take a clip from a CD and use it as background for your YouTube video.
And I see so many people that do this. Like, actually, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. Just not that they use music, but people have it too loud and you can't hear what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah,
but
that's their problem.
A lot of people just use whatever music they want to.
Yeah, and this is actually, I mean, it doesn't really affect the individual too much, but this is an area where the music producers and the film producers are, in constant litigation with YouTube.
Because you can really get yourself in trouble with that shit too.
You can, yeah. And in particular, I mean, it depends on whose stuff you are using. Some publishers basically have an attitude that unless it's extreme, they're not going to worry about it. Other publishers really, really defend their rights, and if they find out about you, they will litigate. They will sue you. Disney, for example, is notorious for going after even very small violators.
They're like little kids and shit. So
yeah, there was actually a case where Disney went after a daycare center that had painted Disney characters on their walls, and Disney Studios sued them. So, if it's an ethical choice and a choice of how much risk you want to undertake, but if you're going to illegally use someone's material, to some extent it does make a difference whose material you're using and how much risk you're taking.
Yeah. Well, and as far as music goes, and I should have researched this a little bit because I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there are websites where artists put up original music that they allow you to use as well.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's not just music. It's a lot of people will distribute their work, whether they're photographs or painting or music, under a Creative Commons license or something similar to that, where the creator is essentially saying, you have the right to use this material. I am giving you my rights. Now, they often have a few restrictions on that, like I will give you rights to use my material as long as you credit me in this manner. Mm-hmm. But again, that's the artist's choice. If they want to put their materials out there for other people to use, they can certainly do that. But you should not assume that just because something is on the internet that the artist has given.
Exactly. I was going to say the onus is kind of on you to figure out and research what the limitations on that are.
Yeah.
And I know most Creative Commons sites, when I've used Creative Commons stuff, sometimes for graphic design work, the artist has a very specific, you can do this, 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 and this if you do this, but don't do this. Like, most of them have the permissions right on the image or on the music.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, as far as all of this goes, like with the internet stuff, I think we had by far the most questions, and I have had by far the most friends struggle with copyright stuff with Pinterest. So everybody just kind of wants to know what the fuck the deal with Pinterest even is. Like, what is it legal? Is it legal to be posting shit on Pinterest? Like, where's the line with that?
When you are pinning something, Pinterest is actually making a copy of it. And to that extent, yeah, they are violating copyrights. They claim that they are protected because they are not actually the ones doing the posting. Their users are doing the posting. And therefore, Pinterest itself may not be legally liable, but all of the people that are pinning things on Pinterest are potentially violating copyright law. Mm-hmm. Now, in some cases, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if I'm an artist and I have my work posted on my website and some people pin it, I'm not too concerned about that. But we've seen cases where there have been really, really large scale use of someone else's work, where an individual went out and hunted down every image they could find from a particular artist and created pages and pages of images from those artists. And the problem there is that it actually starts to hurt the artist, because now when someone is searching for the artist's work, instead of seeing the artist's website, the first thing that's going to come up is all these Pinterest pages. And so the artist's work is being used to draw traffic to someone else's page. So yeah, that's a copyright violation.
And it's a big deal. And that's kind of I was talking to a friend of mine here the other day trying to explain that. They're like, well, why does it matter if it goes back to the artist's page? But that traffic is a big deal when you're a small scale artist trying to draw people to your site so you can make a living.
Exactly. And now Pinterest is getting all of the traffic from all the people whose work is being used.
This has happened to a couple of friends of mine, so it's it's kind of like, so if it's happening to you, what do you do? How can you protect yourself from this? Is there a way to make it stop?
Yes, there is actually. I mentioned that Pinterest was safe from being held liable because Pinterest isn't copying the work other people are posting. There is a body of law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that says that the operator of a website is not responsible for copyright violations from people who post on their site, provided they have a mechanism for the original artist to get the work taken down. And that mechanism is called the DMCA takedown process. So the operator of a website like Pinterest is required to have a process where you can file a complaint and get the materials removed from their site. And on my website, on the Copyright Safeguard website, we have a page describing the DMCA takedown process that tells you exactly how to do that. And not only do we tell you how to do it, but we have the contact information for most of the major web publishing sites: Pinterest, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so forth. So if you find that your work has been copied on Pinterest or any other site, you can go to Copyright Safeguard, go to the page about the DMCA takedown process, and it will tell you what you can do about it. The one caveat here is that the Digital Millennium Copyright Law applies only to companies that are operating in the United States. It's most of the major internet companies. If the company is offshore, they don't have to respond to the DMCA takedown notices. Many of them will anyway, but you do get into issues with sites operating out of India or China, and there's really very little you can do about that.
Yeah, we mentioned that because we did a previous episode over the summer about internet copyright, but it was pretty basic, and that was one of the things that I brought up, is that international copyright law is not, like, some countries don't observe it. They don't have to observe it. So sometimes you're just kind of screwed.
Yeah. Countries like India and China actually do comply with the copyright treaties, but dealing with the process can get very expensive. I know someone whose entire website was copied by a company in India.
Oh my goodness.
And she ended up hiring a copyright attorney in the United States, who then brought in a copyright attorney in India, and they filed suit in India, and she eventually got the site taken down, but it cost her thousands of dollars to go through the process because she had to file a suit in India under Indian law.
So for me, it would pretty much be, I would be SOL, because I absolutely wouldn't have the resources to pay for that kind of legal fees.
Yeah, that's true. For most small site operators, it's something that you're just out of luck. However, don't forget that Digital Millennium Copyright Law is a very effective tool for sites that operate in the United States and in many other countries as well.
And even, I think I mentioned this in the last episode we did about this, but I have a friend who last year found out that someone in Brazil was not only using her images on her website, but using her images and producing art and selling it in her boutique.
Mm-hmm.
But she contacted her, and the lady was really sorry. She didn't realize that I don't know if she didn't realize, but once she got called on it, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And she pulled the images down, and they made arrangements for compensation. And I think that if you just reach out to people, a lot of people will stop doing it.
Yeah. And again, on my site, I talk a little bit about what your recourse is. Your first recourse can be just ask them to stop doing it. Maybe a little harsher step is to get an attorney to draft a cease and desist letter. There are things that you can do that are short of legal action, and oftentimes those things are effective. Sometimes, as you say, just asking is enough. Sometimes sending a threatening letter gets their attention. You can kind of escalate and go as far as you're comfortable going. I will mention one more thing here that's interesting, is that Google actually has a DMCA takedown process. So let's say that there is a website in India that has copied your work, and they refuse to take it down, and you don't have the resources to file a lawsuit. What you can do is you can file a DMCA takedown request with Google and get Google to remove them from the Google index. So now this company in India still has your content on their website, but it's not going to show up in search results because Google is a U.S. company that will respond to the DMCA takedown process.
That's really great. I actually didn't know that. That's very good to know. So yay, Google. Good on you. And in general, how long does the process take for that kind of stuff? I know it can be a little bit lengthy, but just, I'm sure because you're waiting in a queue.
Yeah, it's generally pretty quick. I generally find that within a week, the offending work is gone. Sometimes it can take longer. You might run into a situation where it takes a couple of months, but the companies are generally quite responsive.
That's good to know. And I think this kind of goes along the lines of what we've been talking about, but we did have a couple of people ask about people using their images as their Facebook profile picture, or people creating dummy Facebook pages or copy Facebook pages. And I'm assuming that Facebook has the same process that all these other websites do. to get that stuff taken down.
Yeah, they do, but there are a couple of things going on here that are really separate bodies of law. If someone uses my picture on their Facebook profile, they're actually not violating my copyright. They're violating the copyright of the photographer who took the picture. So technically, the photographer who took the picture of me would have to file the DMCA takedown notice because it's their copyright.
So that's for like fake Facebook pages when someone makes one that and claiming they're you.
Well, really doesn't make any difference with regard to copyright law. They're violating the copyright of the photographer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as them using my identity, that's an entirely different body.
That's a whole different thing.
Where we're dealing with, identity theft, where we're dealing with rights of privacy. And in those situations, it's a more complicated body of law. I don't know a lot about it. And you're probably going to need to get an attorney involved because there isn't any easy magic process like the DMCA process.
Okay. But if someone's using a picture of your artwork as their profile picture,
then they're violating your copyright. You can file a DMCA takedown notice, and that should take care of it.
Okay. Well, this has all been really awesome, Bob, and I think you answered all these questions really well. So can you give us your site information again, just so the listeners can go check that out?
Sure. It's www.copyrightsafeguard.com. And I do have a question and answer section, so if people have more questions, feel free to submit them to the site, and I'll do my best to get them answered.
Awesome. And they can also register all of their blogs, even their free blogs, all of their websites, anything like that. You can register through that site.
They sure can. Yes.
And just, I don't know if we covered it. What does the registry do for them?
It basically just gives them a link that they can put on their site that will pop up kind of a warning about the copyright law and the fact that the material is protected by copyright law. It basically lets people know that you are serious about your defending your rights. The other thing is that if you ever get into a situation of copyright litigation where you're actually suing someone, and, for some artists, there's enough money on the table that you might find yourself doing that at some point, you can get more damages, you can collect more in your lawsuit if you can demonstrate that the person willfully infringed. In other words, they knew they were violating your rights. If you have a copyright notice on your website, particularly a pop-up type of notice like we provide, that's a strong argument that anybody that copied the work off your website should have known that they were violating your rights. So it's another way of making that statement that you're aware of your rights and you will defend them.
That's great. And I think that's another thing that just, like, I always put a terms of service on my blog. There's a whole page. But having that in addition to, I think just really, it's a good way to strengthen, like you said, you're standing in a legal case if you have to pursue someone legally.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob.
All right, Katie.
And it's been way too long since I talked to you. Anyway, so, damn it, I'm going to have to venture down that way and visit you guys again soon.
For sure. Love to see you down here.
Yeah. Well, if any of you listeners have any other questions, you can go to Bob's site and ask him directly, and I think he would answer them way better than I would. And I would encourage you to do so. And I also encourage you to go and register even your writing blogs. It doesn't have to be artwork because your writing is copyrighted under the same laws, correct?
That's right.
Yeah,
right.
All of your writing.
Music,
anything. Go register it, and then you'll just have that little safety net. And it's just a really good way to, and it might just deter someone anyway.
That's certainly
having that there. So, right on. Well, next week I am going to be back with listener and friend of the podcast, Lonnie, and we're going to be talking about art furniture, and hopefully Sharon will be back the following week. So until then, go make some cool shit, yo.